These kids weren't like indifferent. They weren't apathetic. They were afraid. We weren't dealing with a knowledge gap. I think we faced something far more profound. There's a hope gap. So that day, it set us down this journey. And that comment sparked the creation of this program that we now run. It's called the Institute for Global Solutions. So around 2012, alongside 3 incredible human beings, we were given the green light to run this program. And the whole point of the program was to empower teenagers to get involved in our world and to make meaningful change.
So this is going to be the last episode of 2025. We'll kick back off again in 2026. And listen, since there's not going to be any new episodes released in the month of December, why don't you look back on the 102 episodes that I've done, go through the list and find an episode you haven't listened to and think, oh, I should listen to that. Because unless you've listened to them all, which you have, send me an email saying, listen, I've listened to them all. And I'll send you a prize because there's nobody that has listened to them all, I guarantee it. I am very thrilled that this is my last episode of 25, not because it's the end, but because of having Graeme Mitchell on my podcast. So Graeme is somebody that I've recently come to know, and kind of bothers me that I didn't know him before that, because the work he's doing is just, it is so in line with what I think we need today. I am inundated, as I'm sure you are, with people who are telling us how bad education is. They're telling us how terrible the world is. And we hear that all the time. And we're not denying that. I'm not denying that. But what Graeme and his work with Global Solutions has done, and the work he's doing, really is providing a very different narrative, a hopeful narrative. And it's not just a narrative based on intuition or desire. It's based on facts. We live in a better world than we've ever lived in by many metrics. And as he shared in that clip, there is a hope gap. And we have to, as educators, as grandparents, as parents, be better at closing the hope gap and providing optimism, because it is there, it's real, and we can empower people to do that. So he's all in on the vibe I'm going for. And Graeme just shares not only the story of that, but the way he's working as part of a team. Just so much goodness in his share today. So I'm grateful that he spent some time with me. I'm hopeful that you will listen to this entire episode and glean much, and reach out to Graeme and say, hey, Graeme, I want to learn more about how I could bring this back to my own community, because I think he's certainly willing to do that and will help people in that quest. So enjoy my conversation today with Graeme Mitchell. So Graeme, tell me about the state of the world. I know that's a very broad question to start with, but of course there's a reason why I'm asking, and you probably know why I'm asking you about the state of the world, because generally speaking, when you talk to the average person on the street about the state of the world, it's pretty bad, right? There's so many bad things about it. And I'm not sure you aren't blind to that, but tell me about the state of the world. Let's see where you go with that question. We'll direct the rest of our conversation.
Yeah, let's just jump right in. I think there's no doubt that our world faces a ton of challenges right now. The price of living is just skyrocketing. Climate records are being shattered every year. We got conflict stalking, I guess, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan. But our world, for all its imperfections, is actually in a much better state than most people think. And if you look at the data on this, Dean, it's crystal clear by almost every single metric, whether it be life expectancy, health, safety, happiness, education. These things are all on the rise, and not just in the West, but increasingly across the world. I think what is a bit more concerning is the fact that so many of us have this kind of misconception about what's happening. So it seems as if many of us know all about all the problems, but we don't know so much about the progress or the possibility.
So when we think,
So,
I mean, you and I both have referenced Hans Rowling in his book that kind of speaks directly to some of those misconceptions that we have. When did this, I don't know, realization and or interest in saying in talking about maybe things aren't quite as bad as we think. Do you remember how or when that emerged?
Yeah, actually, it really crystallized in kind of one moment. In 2008, it was actually a rainy day like we have here on the West Coast. And I was finishing up a class with a particularly bright grade 10 group. And we were talking about climate change. I thought I was running what I thought was a good lesson. I had my charts, my satellite images, my video clips. And then it was towards the very end of the class. Kids were leaning, they were engaged. One of my brightest students, he was at the very back. He leans back in his chair. He stands up and he just kind of shouts out, "What's the point? We're screwed." And then the bell rang, and it was the most depressing thing. And they all shuffled out. And those words, they kind of stuck with me for the rest of the day. And I know teenagers are really good at complaining, but this was something different, right? And so the next day, when we came back together, I circled everyone up together and I wrote his words in the middle of the whiteboard. What's the point? And then I turned and just said, all right, let's unpack this. And at first there was really nothing, but then one comment and then another. And it was as if almost a dam just broke loose. And for the next 45 minutes or so, just unloaded. And by the time the dust had settled, I guess one thing was really clear. These kids weren't like indifferent. They weren't apathetic. They were afraid. We weren't dealing with a knowledge gap. I think we faced something far more profound. There's a hope gap. So that day, it set us down this journey. And that comment sparked the creation of this program that we now run. It's called the Institute for Global Solutions. So around 2012, alongside 3 incredible human beings, we were given the green light to run this program. And the whole point of the program was to empower teenagers to get involved in our world and to make meaningful change. And you reference Hans Rosling, and on day one, when they come into our program, we give them this test. We make it into kind of a fun game. We pretend that they're not only competing against each other, but they're going up against my puppy, Rosie. So I take 3 treats, label them A, B, or C. And then for each question, I throw them in the middle, and whatever Rosie chooses first, that's her answer. So statistically speaking, she's got about a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right. And so to beat Rosie, they only need to get 33%. And they answer quickly, they answer confidently, and they're almost always wrong. Few ever beat Rosie. And they all think that poverty is rising, that life expectancy is shrinking, that emissions are still occurring out of control. And so when we look at the problems and we use a really powerful, we look at the data, we lean into the data all the time, but we don't just look at the problems. We then shine a light on the progress and also the possibility. Because right now, the kids in our program, they're getting a ton of the problems. That's all that they see. And this was it really came to light a couple of years ago. Just on the fly, I was watching a video in class with our kids on geothermal energy, and an ad popped up in the middle of the video, and it just said, "How much time do you spend on your cell phones?" And I could see them perk up a little bit. So I paused the video. I said, okay, take out your cell phones and go into settings. Let's see, how much time did you spend yesterday, this week? And then I said, okay, let's multiply that by 52. And then they start adding it up and you can see the numbers. And I said, okay, once you got your number, bring it up to the whiteboard and let's tally it up. So one by one, they're coming up to the whiteboard. And by the time the final kid had come up, we added them up on the fly. It was 46,000 hours, one grade 10 class on social media just last year. And so I think it was a shocking statistic, but it was a bit of a window into their world. So the next day, with this number in mind, we said, let's use these things a little bit and let's do some research. And so we took a bit of a deep dive and we looked at what was on their screens. And they were getting the regular stuff, the memes, the cats, the dances, all that fun stuff. But then when we dug a little bit deeper, it was this constant stream of stress-inducing content that was washing over them day after day. It was climate chaos, conflict, constant comparisons, and this idea of always needing to be perfect. And so I think a big part of our model and that aha moment, it showed us that educators, we're no longer these gatekeepers of information. As far as I can see, the gates have been kicked in. they are getting a disproportionate amount of information that is meant to keep their attention, to keep them scared and keep them outraged. So a big part of us as teachers now is to build that balance, not just be gatekeepers, but I think builders of balance. And so our program over the last decade started with about 18 kids taking part. It was pretty niche, but it has since kids have voted with their feet. And we now have more than 200 kids taking part every year. We have a wait list that just keeps growing. And we are showing them, of course, there are a ton of problems. And we look at them with an evidence-based lens. But then we really pivot to the progress and also looking at what could go right. And when we give them this lens, it shows, I think we've got quite a bit of data on our own program now. It shows that not only are they feeling a bit more resilient, but they have this kind of informed optimism. And I think we're onto something here.
100%. Yeah. So let's keep going on that thread around, you've been doing this for over a decade now. So in terms of just their improved attitudes and perception of the world, which is in and of itself would be pretty valuable, what other data might you have in terms of how that's impacted them beyond that? I'm always curious about that, because I would say in general, K-12 schools don't have great data on the impact of their work 5 or 10 years. And again, I understand it's not easy to make those correlations and connections between what a kid did in his 10th grade English class and what he's doing now as a 30-year-old adult. I get it. However, I'm just curious to know if you have any kind of data that looks at what's happened with these kids beyond their time in the Global Solutions program.
Yeah, we're lucky. We've had one master's thesis, some doctoral dissertation, and I'm excited. It looks like we have in the pipe a couple graduate students who are really looking into diving into the data. So the data that we have so far suggests it's mostly interviews with probably about 100 students to date. Looks at these qualitative interviews. They're pulling out that from coming into the program to leaving and comparing them with students that are in the regular stream social studies, they seem to have a more balanced perspective. They know that there are problems. In fact, I think they understand the problems better than those outside of the cohort. But unlike many of the other students who haven't gone through IGS, they seem to get the other side of the story. And we talk about this in class. We were talking about it this week. We were talking about the idea of Disney movies. And Disney tells a great story, right? They always have the collapse, but then they have the rebuild. They have the chaos, but then also at the end, you have that culminating moment in the redemption. And so we were talking about it in class with The Lion King. This is how I think The Lion King would be told through the lens of our kids. It would be like Simba watches his father fall to his death. He runs away. He eats bugs forever. The end. Like that's the story that they're seeing. And we know that, I have 3 kids myself, and I've watched a lot of Disney movies. We know that Disney doesn't end the movie there, right? They know that you have to have the collapse, but also the rebuild. So I think it is so important that we also give our students a more complete story. And what we're finding, even from these small studies on our program, is that by the time they leave us in grade 12, they are going into the world with a more balanced understanding. Those 46,000 hours that they're taking in are definitely trying to skew their perceptions. And we're biologically wired to have a negativity bias. We have a media environment, course to, if it bleeds, it leads. And now we have algorithms that supercharge fear and outrage. So a lot of the systems that our kids are living inside, and quite frankly, that we're all inside, are skewing us towards this negative perception of the world. And so we follow this kind of framework that was built on one of my favorites researchers, a guy named Max Roser, who runs my favorite website, Our World in Data. And his kind of phrase is this: the world is awful, the world is better, and the world can be much better. And if you can hold those 3 ideas in your mind at the same time, almost like you're juggling, you get a much more balanced perspective. And it's one that I think is a lot more hopeful. And so we don't have all of the data yet, and we're building this kind of plane in the air, but we're also hearing a lot from universities. And when we're presenting, and our students are presenting all over the place, they seem to give us this feedback that these kids seem to be a bit more unflappable. They seem to be a bit more resilient. And whereas some of the students that are coming out are a bit more fragile or seem like they're almost overwhelmed. So we'll see. I'm hoping we get more data down the road, but I feel like we're moving the ball in the right direction.
And not only, I think, would what you've described being really important is building that cautious optimism, but I think it directly addresses whatever mental health crisis our young people are facing, which are obviously linked to what they're consuming online and so forth, but also a perception that what's in it for me? This doesn't look like there's much hope. And there are, I guess we can point to, I would say, the reality of sort of the economics of our day, where it doesn't seem, and again, maybe I'm wrong on this one, but it doesn't seem like young people are necessarily guaranteed to have the same financial success as their parents. That said, I think this is also an opportunity to perhaps more directly than we have is maybe change the definition of success, in the sense that maybe success isn't defined by the fact that my parents had a 2,000 square foot house. I have a 3,000 square foot house. All of these kinds of markers of success that we've typically had. And again, that's not to ignore the impact of the economics and the fact that even the studies where, I can't remember the name of the book that one of the happiness studies talked about. Can money buy happiness? No, but you do have to have a certain level of income in order to not be feeling the stresses of poverty and so forth. But they're also very clear that once you go past that, your happiness does not increase at the same rate. So I also wonder if in your program, there is either a direct or maybe even an indirect conversation around just defining what it means to be a person. I'm curious about the term human flourishing. I think that's a really interesting idea that speaks to, and I know the OECD is talking about, that speaks to, a much richer appreciation of the world and experiencing all that means to experience as humans. Some of that bad too, like not everything has to be a rosy walk. But I guess I'm just wondering what that conversation is around their own definition of success as an adult.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. We talk a lot about what success looks like in today's world. And I think one of the strengths of our program is we have real conversations with our kids. We run it often like a university. We have seminars, we have readings and videos that inform what we're going to talk about, but we try to get into the weeds with these kids and hear what they're thinking about. And so we've been talking a lot about what does success look like. And recently we've been leaning on this model out of the Harvard Happiness Lab with Dr. Arthur Brooks. And he breaks down this idea of what constitutes success, at least for them. And he's has these three macronutrients for a successful life. And the first one is enjoyment. And our kids, they think enjoyment is just pleasure, but he breaks it down as more than just pleasure. Pleasure is those dopamine hits that you get, when you're scrolling, but it's fleeting. So it's pleasure plus people. So if you want to have real enjoyment, you need pleasure plus people making memories. So we talk a lot about this idea of real enjoyment, being together, doing things that matter. And then we have this idea of satisfaction. And for a lot of kids, they live in a world where there's not a lot of friction. And we know that we've evolved to have to do hard things, to go out to do hunting or to build the shelter. Our brain rewards us when we do hard things. And so with our students, we're trying to really get them being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So putting themselves in positions where they have to do something, accomplish it, and then they get that satisfaction. And then the final thing, and I think you're touching on it here with this idea of flourishing, is meaning. And we go a lot into this idea of meaning. And so for many of them, they don't have a really good answer as to why they are here and who are they connected to and what is the point of their life. So we try to weave in a bit of philosophy here and answer those big questions. And when you look at this idea of enjoyment plus satisfaction plus meaning, and you try to find a balance there, we find that we try to redefine this notion of what success looks like. And we're also excited, these learners that are in our schools right now, and my own kids who are going through school right now, they're in between two worlds. Things are moving so quickly right now. I have the good fortune teaching up to the University of Victoria as well. And we're just looking at how quickly things have changed over the last 2 years in terms of the curriculum we're putting out, how we assess, how AI is shifting things in real time. So we're trying to future-proof our kids. We don't know what the world's going to look like in 5 years or 10 years, but we're trying to give them the building blocks to build satisfaction, to really look at what a meaningful life is and to find true enjoyment. And so we've tried to break those things down into tangible measures, and they can check in each week. Where am I lacking? Where am I ahead? And again, this is still a process that we're trying to refine. But I think having these conversations, talking about what it means to flourish in a world that has a lot of problems, is much better than we think. And we could actually make it radically better. And then maybe finding a spot for them to choose a path in school and maybe employment where they do well economically, but they also feel satisfied and do real meaningful work. So we try to we have this amazing speaker series where we bring in people and leaders from all over the country, really all over the world now with the power of video. And we try to show them different interpretations of success, business leaders, activists, ecologists, trying to show them that our narrow perception of what success might look like might need a bit of a rethink. So it's become a big part of our curriculum because unfortunately, a lot of these kids, they're struggling a little bit. And so just anecdotally, when I first started teaching about 20 years ago, I would say maybe 1 in 10 of the kids in the class was struggling with mental health challenges. But now in our program, and maybe it's the type of kids who sign up to take our program, I'm not sure, but we're looking at 30 to 40% of them are really struggling with anxiety or depression. So I think it's important we go through the content, of course, but also building community and also showing them how to get meaning in their own lives, I think is a big part of what it means to be a teacher now in 2025.
100%. And as you've outlined those sort of big goals, I think it'd be hard to argue that that shouldn't be the goal for every student in all of our K-12. So it's lofty for you to think about for that. Now, help me understand a little bit more, get into the weeds just a little bit of the structure of the program. So this is, if this were one simple class in a kid's high school career, it would be like, that's really good, but it's hard to get, hard to do much really to think of the impact of one class. So maybe just share a little bit about what that structure looks like for students going through the International Global Solutions program.
Yeah. So in our IGS program, it started with just really one class, and it started with a sustainability class. But we soon realized if we want to look at the big ones of our day, we need to combine social studies and science. So we have 2 teachers in the class at any one time, but then we need double the amount of kids. So we have close to 50 kids in our cohort and all the way through. So grade 9s and 10s, we combine social studies and science, which I love because we are able to go a lot deeper. So if you're looking at something like climate change, of course, you can break down the science, but then you can also look at the policy, you can look at the psychology, and you can look at it from a multitude of perspectives. And so it actually, rather than taking away time, we find we get a lot of what we call white space. We can go further and deeper. It also means as a teacher, I get to co-teach. There's 4 of us now. We're great friends. And whereas most teachers, by the time that June hits, are just on their last legs, I find that this really rejuvenates. We are able to bounce ideas off there. There's always another adult with you in the room. And it just leads to, I think, a more sustainable teaching model. And I'm a huge fan of this cohort model because a lot of our kids start in grade 9. It's just 2 blocks, but then it goes all the way through. So 2 out of 8, all the way through, they're with us. And some come out and then some join us later. And at the upper levels, we combine environmental science with courses around justice and philosophy. And so it's pretty exciting. But they get the core courses, but we blend them together. And what we found is that academically, they seem to be doing better on these because they have a better understanding. But more importantly, we are able to get them out into the community a ton because we get them for 2 blocks most days. It allows us to get on a bus, go visit the scientists, go to the wetlands, go see what kind of like renewable energy projects, or else bring experts in. And so it affords us a ton of space and time to get them out into the real world and then to bring the real world into apps. And it goes from 9 to 12 now. And like I said, 50 kids per grade, and we are maxed out. but it seems to be a model that is built for sustainability, because I started teaching by myself in my classroom, like many of your listeners and the people watching. And we know that teaching is inherently social, but it can be really lonely too when you shut that door and it's just you and all those kids. And this model, almost by accident, has just unleashed this excitement that we have to come to work. We're always texting each other at night. Did you see this clip? Why don't we weave this in? And I think that social piece, we talked about a lot of the kids are struggling, but I think a lot of teachers are feeling a bit burned out and overwhelmed. So if you can get administrators to greenlight this, I think it's an approach that we have stumbled across that seems to just allow us to really thrive in our teaching careers. And fair dues to our admin team and our superintendents. They have given us just an incredible amount of autonomy to try things out. And our students are sometimes, I feel like they're a bit of guinea pigs in this educational experiment, but they're part of the process, and they realize that we're going to try things, we're going to fail, and then we're going to try again. And so the model itself is continuously evolving. And now I have the good fortune to speak with different districts and consult all over the place. And there's a desire for this. And I know it's happening all over the place as well. And so I think, yeah, the need for this and a desire for this. But from a teaching perspective, I'm having more fun than I've ever had.
And that you're not the first person that I've talked to over my years who, whenever they've been able to do any kind of team teaching, they just light up, because this is just such a different. And I'm the same way. I do a lot of work by myself, but anytime I get to partner with another human being in terms of facilitating or presenting those kind of things, it's just like, that's way more fun. Way more fun. And I'm sure there are teachers who have actually chose the profession because they get to shut the door and be by themselves. And that's fine. That's not a knock. In fact, if that's what you love, the system is set up perfectly for you. You're in your sweet spot. But I do believe there are many people like yourself who would just relish the opportunity to do that. And then again, the benefits for you as a teacher are there. But as you said as well, this extended time, which is always a limited thing, and it's always shoehorn people into teaching in a very particular way that may not be conducive to good learning, may not be conducive to what you need to do. But I only got 15 minutes with these kids, so I got to figure out how to jam everything in 50 minutes, and we can't do other things because we don't have time to. So that, as you said before, and then not only that extra time, but being able to merge curriculum to kill two birds with one stone. So while we're doing the study on climate change from a social study, and obviously the environmental impact to humans in terms of how they perceive it and so forth, is not disconnected from the science behind it as well. So I just think it's brilliant. And so has that been, just a couple more questions on that, so that if others are listening to this saying, oh, I'd love to do that one, do you have those kind of resources and support to say, here, we can help you get started in this journey?
For sure. We've been really lucky. I think the number one thing that we get asked is, how do we replicate this and how do we scale this out? And so we spend a lot of our time consulting with different teachers and even districts. And if I'm being honest, there's a ton of great content, and IGS is just one specific way of doing it, but it's opening up the timetable. So it's admin and it's a superintendent, it's a top brass that need to think a little bit outside the box, to be able to find ways to bring those science teachers and those social teachers, those English teachers and those physics teachers. I think the mix is totally up to you, but you have to get creative in timetabling. You got to find a way where you can maybe share labs over here. It is a bit messy, and we've run into a lot of roadblocks. But I think when you bring the people to the table and we say, not just what could go wrong, but like we talked about, what could go right here, and you thinking a bit. We were lucky in 2012 when we got this launched. Our superintendent at the time, Dr. Elder, he was so on board. And in fact, we pitched him and we said, Kevin, we got this idea, the Institute for Global Challenges. And he's like, that sounds good, but we need to reframe it, global solutions. And so I think if any of your listeners are interested, I'd be happy to chat with them how to do this and admin teams. And we figured out a bit of a formula for liberating time and making it work in conventional high school settings. And a lot of it has to do with just the timetable, has to do with seniority, all of that stuff that might not be so as exciting, but it's the key to making a model like this work. And I think there's a lot of appetite for teachers to get together and try things in a different way.
Yeah, my ears always perk up anytime I hear about teachers who are thriving. And listen, I don't mean to say, and this is not to say that you never struggle with this. You're a human being, you're a teacher, you're dealing with kids. It's inherently challenging work, right? There's no rosy path here. But as I think about the sort of the future of this profession and how are we going to ensure that 10, 20 years from now, we have high quality people interested in spending their life with young people in service, we have to be a little bit better. I may be arguing a lot better in what we're offering them, what we're putting them into. And in many cases, all across Canada specifically, there's just some places where it's not great to teach. It's not good for a lot of reasons, tons of things, not just the teaching itself, but oftentimes the things that the external parts of this work. So anytime you can come up with something that says these people are measurably more satisfied in their role, and it's not just because they're that kind of a person. It's because you've built structures in place in order for them to be successful, feel success, see that support. So it's it's complicated. I get it. However, what you're describing is one of these tangible solutions and strategies, I think, that speak to that kind of thing. So your other colleagues, you've been together now, like how long has your sort of core team been together now?
The core team that we have now has been together for just over 10
Wow.
years. Yeah, I'm getting a bit nervous because my good friend who we launched this together, he's coming up to retirement soon. And most people, by the time they're getting ready to retire, are just ready to run out the door.
Tell you the
But
number of days.
he's exactly, no, I want to be part of this. I'm going to miss this so much. And he is a pretty enthusiastic guy by nature. But a big part for us is just like you said, we're teachers, we have our ups and downs. But I know, like today, as we're doing this podcast, my two colleagues are running my class. And tomorrow, when his son is off at the volleyball championships, we can cover each other and we know what's happening. We know the ebbs and flows of the week. So I think a huge thing, whether it's an IGS model or it's something totally unique, looking at creative ways to get teachers working together, not just as a one-off, just or here and there, but really finding ways to make it meaningfully connected and actually timetabled. That's a bit of a game changer. And wherever I go and consult with admin teams and districts around this, once we free up the timetable a little bit, the magic that can happen, it becomes almost this like feedback loop. And so I think I love the content and I love all that stuff. But if I'm being honest, a lot of the magic happens when you set the conditions for this to be able to, or behind the scenes.
No doubt about it. The show is really that I'm doing is really trying to highlight leadership and help people navigate and be better leaders at this role. And you're no doubt in that role. But I like for people to share a little bit about navigating challenges as a leader. And I'm always interested if you have a story or a leadership challenge that it's pretty handy to access in your memory. And maybe even that leadership challenge didn't go well. Maybe you didn't handle it the way you thought you should have or could have, but just as a lesson to, boy, I learned a lot in that time. So do you have a leadership challenge moment that you could call on as something that's big part of where you are today?
Yeah, you know what, Dean, this is a crazy day for me because November 13th is a day that 7 years ago I had something really just crazy that occurred. And it has set my life and my leadership path on a totally different one. So on November 13th, actually, 2018, I was at home. We just got on a field trip at school. We went to IMAX. I came home. And that evening, we were putting our twins and at the time, I guess my 5-year-old son and my 3-year-old twins to bed. And then I snuck downstairs for a quick workout. And I was 38, fit by all accounts. And I wrapped up and I came inside and I was cooling off. And all of a sudden, something felt a little bit off. And then a couple minutes later, my heart stopped. I went into cardiac arrest. And I don't know why this happened, but my wife she was down the hall. She was about to jump in the shower And at the last minute, she like turned the water off and said, you know what, I'm going to go and make the kids lunches now instead. And so she came out, she found me, and then she began to administer CPR. And then all of the paramedics and first responders arrived. And I guess about 12 minutes later, there was 14 of them in my living room. And usually my kids, they would wake up every time the wind would blow. But for some, I don't know, miracle, they stayed in bed. And luckily, I guess it was like the movies. They were shocking me with a defibrillator, and they were able to bring me back. So 5 days after that, I woke up in the hospital. And then a few weeks later, I was home. I was like shaken, but I was alive. So afterwards, we went on this gratitude tour, just thank all the first responders. And we started with the local fire hall. So I think we brought them pizza, and one by one, I'm just going through and shaking their hands. And then I get to the end of the line and I freeze. And standing there with this guy with this big beard and an even bigger smile was one of my former students. So the boy that I had once taught was literally the man who had brought me back to life. And for me in that moment, I know it sounds kind of cliche, but everything, it just clicked. We are not preparing our leaders for the next, like our kids for the next kind of tests. We're preparing them, I think, for the next decade, for the next challenge, the next breakthrough. And right now, like we talked about, Dean, our kids are struggling. So for me that day, I realized that this idea of hope, it can't be a luxury, okay? It needs to be a lifeline. We need to give our kids hope, because sitting in your class today, sitting in your audience class today could be the next first responder, could be the next like innovator, could be the next like leader that we're all really depending on. And I think we cannot afford to have them be sidelined by fear, right? We need them to harness hope. So that crazy story on this very day, I was thinking about it this morning, it changed the trajectory. We now spend half of our time looking not just at problems, but progress and possibility. We earmark 50% of our time to progress and possibility. And so this isn't about sugarcoating reality. I actually think it's about leaning into the facts. So we're trying to balance our wins with the challenges ahead. And so we're trying to find that sweet spot. And so for us now as a leader, I believe we need to harness hope. We need to, of course, acknowledge all the problems, but we use this analogy. Most of the kids think we're at base camp. All they see is this like mountain ahead. They think all we have is problems. Our goal is also, we're well into the climb, right? If you look back down, look at all those peaks that we've conquered. Those seemed impossible too, all right? We got big, steep climbs ahead, but we're well into it. And so for me, that crazy event and the fact that it was one of my students that brought me back, that is the story that forever changes how I think about this job and also about the idea of leadership.
And I relate, not because I had that kind of near-death experience, but because about 8 years ago, I had my first grandchild. And as I've watched her and her two brothers grow up, and now, especially with my work in AI, I talk about them all the time as around, because I go down some very bad rabbit holes when it comes to AI around, this is the end, guys. And I don't listen, I'm not a futurist, so I can't say that to the degree to which any of that might happen. But of course, there's so much speculation. But it's just, we've talked about this before. We don't have to work hard to find all the things that are wrong with the world. And I also think we're in an institution there's a bit of a default to weakness, right? So you are trying to identify all the things that kids are struggling with and then support them, right? So where's the kid weak? We aren't really an institution that defaults to strengths. So we have to work a little bit harder to say, does a kid need to know, yeah, okay, this kid's going to struggle with math. Do we think that he's going to spend, or she's going to spend, the majority of her life doing, that math's going to be a major part of her world? Probably not. Again, we know they have to have a level of literacy in so many areas in order to be a functioning human. But how can we focus on the things that are good at? But also, how do we continue to provide those messages of hope and possibility and so forth? So I think there's a real, I would say, an importance today more than ever, perhaps, to have that disposition to provide that, not in a kind of a false way, but that's why the work that you're doing, and that's why the basis of what you're doing is not built on some Pollyanna, just hopefully fingers crossed. You actually have data to show like, oh, we actually are proving that our world is, and we say our world is less racist than it is. It was. That doesn't say it's not still racist. That doesn't say we have figured it all out. And I would say in Canada, what we've done as an education with our Indigenous cultures is a really good story, right? Like we've done a lot. We're way better today than we were 20 years ago. Way better. My understanding, everyone's understanding is better. Still lots to do. No one's saying we're done, but it's just a good story, I think. And I think there's so many of those really good stories. Again, nothing but congratulations to and excitement and just a hope of continuation for the work you do. I just want to shift and just as I get you out of here, I always kind of end on a little bit of a personal note, things that you're doing, thinking about maybe outside of the profession. Let's talk about what you're maybe reading and or listening to for professional growth right now. So what's in your wheelhouse right there?
Yeah. So right now I am reading an amazing book. It fits, actually, the title fits. It's by a woman named Hannah Ritchie. It's called Not the End of the World. And it looks at, of course, just a lot of stuff we've been talking about, how we have a lot of challenges. It's a great book. And for me right now, what I'm thinking about a ton is this. It's a simple idea, but I think it's at the crux of a lot of the things we've been talking about. And I think it's what we really need to be thinking. I was talking about this with my pre-service teachers today up at UVic. And it's this idea that's simple. I think our thoughts, they're profoundly shaped by everything that we consume. And so we know this with food, right? If you and I go and we start eating like chocolate bars and junk food for a week, we know that we're going to feel lousy. Our energy levels are going to be bad. Our sleep will be terrible, and we might not look that great. But we don't think about this with what it is that we put into our minds, what we feed our minds. So I am all about curating better inputs. So whether it be better podcasts, better books, better conversations. I'm a bit obsessed with this right now, Dean. It's like better inputs, better thoughts, better impact. And if we can get our students, if we can get ourselves around that and curating better inputs, I think the world of education, whether we don't know what's coming with AI, but we can control a lot of the things that we take in. We can also filter out the stuff that we don't need, that noise. And then we can also bring in voices that maybe challenge our own, right? We can try to filter the inputs and also stretch them a bit. And increasingly, I'm trying to bring in more voices that disagree with me in a grounded, in a way that is respectful. But I feel like that's really what I'm focusing on right now. And so I'm trying to bring in a lot of inputs that maybe in the past I haven't listened to, and I've tried to push over here. And for educators out there, I think one of my favorite podcasts that I'm listening to right now, I really love Adam Grant's stuff. He brings in a lot of psychology and I think a lot of leadership that can bridge into the world of education. But yeah, I'm thinking about this a lot. And right now, I'm running my kids around to all these different activities. Normally, I'd be spending more time thinking about how the Canucks are doing, but they're not doing so right now. So I got to put my attention elsewhere.
Okay. I'm laughing inside because my next question is going to be almost the antithesis of what you just said. Because the second question I would ask is, what are you consuming just for fun? And oftentimes when I say that, it's usually, don't be afraid to give me a guilty pleasure. So as much as you've just told me how much you're focusing on high quality, curated information you're consuming, tell me once in a while you reach for a chocolate bar and just, you know what, sometimes having a chocolate bar. So what's the chocolate bar of media that you're consuming just for whether it's a treat or whatever? But if you have none, I get it, because you just told me you're trying to
Probably there's a bit too many, so I think I've had to cut a lot out. But a lot of guilty pleasures. I love sports, so I spend a lot of time either watching sports. But what is this? Below Deck. I shouldn't tell people this, but my wife and I, we worked on cruise ships. That's where we met 20 years ago. So it's a reality show where they're on these expensive yachts and they're showing them working behind the scenes. So I love that one. I'm not going to give up that.
There you go. You got to have that. Again, there's worse things that you can consume.
Exactly. No, I think it's, again, coming back to it, I think it's balance. I think right now, so much of the stuff we're taking in is just not intentional. And so I think You probably wouldn't let Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg choose what you're having for dinner.
Right, right.
So
Yes.
maybe
No. And again, I think about some of the, you'd almost call them mindless, but there's a comfort to me watching. I could tell you every episode of Seinfeld there is, but every once in a while, I watch a Seinfeld episode. But actually I would make the argument there's still some quality and there's value in that, right? It's not highbrow. I'm not, my academic levels of understanding aren't going to go through the roof, but anyway, but that's interesting too, but you got to have that little balance. Okay. Last question. So I love the island. You're in Saanich, so much good stuff there in that part of the world. But last question is, give me a bit of an unknown hidden gem of a thing to do, a place to go, a restaurant to eat at in your neck of the woods. Maybe it's Victoria, maybe it's Saanich, maybe it's Sydney. I don't know, wherever you kind of want to point to in that area, but just a place that somebody said, oh, I don't know, I've heard of that. That sounds like a really cool place. You got so many, you got to give me one.
Yeah, no, I think we've got a secret beach, but my wife will kill me if I tell you where that is.
Okay.
But right down there, we're lucky we live in Brentwood Bay, and just behind me we have this beautiful provincial park, Todd Inlet. It's in the Wasanic Sinchothan language. I think it's Niquit. My pronunciation is probably off, but it's where I often start my day. I take my dog Rosie through there for runs, and it's beautiful. It used to be, back in the day, about 100 years ago, it used to be a limestone quarry, and then Butchart Gardens is built right next to it. But it's just this incredible, beautiful place that has a ton of history, beautiful trees, beautiful inlets, and it's one of my favorite places. So it was definitely discovered during COVID, but I think it's still, most people don't know about it. And if you're ever in the area in central Saanich, check out Todd Inlet. It's the place to be.
Sounds great. Listen, as we started, full disclosure for those people listening that got all the way through, I did not give you any questions ahead of time. So we just started fresh here. And I only became aware of your work, even though I worked in Saanich, but haven't been aware of your work only in the last little while. I know you went out and gave an opening talk at Chris Kennedy's district in West Vancouver, and your colleagues, both Dave Eberwine and Paul McKenzie, speak very highly of you. And I just think I want to shine a light on what you're doing. I think it's amazing. I think there's so much there for people to be curious about. So I hope they do reach out to you and see if we can continue to expand the work you're doing, because I think it's so important and it makes such a difference. So thank you so much for the time, and thank you so much for your work.
Thanks so much, Dean, and I really appreciate your work, and congrats yourself on the 100th episode. That's quite an accomplishment.
All right. Talk soon.